Stresa front, Italy's secondary role in Mussolini's bitterness, and moral defense of abolishing universal suffrage. Stresa front, Italy's secondary role in Mussolini's bitterness, historical context of the Stresa front. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, imposed severe restrictions on Germany, including limits on its military capabilities to prevent future aggression. These included capping the German army at 100,000 men, prohibiting conscription, and forbidding the development of an air force or significant naval expansion. However, by the mid-1930s, under Adolf Hitler's chancellorship, Germany began openly defying these terms. In March 1935, Hitler announced plans to reintroduce conscription, expand the army to 36 divisions, approximately 500,000 men, and build an air force, direct violations that alarmed European powers. This announcement prompted a diplomatic response from Britain, France, and Italy, culminating in the Stresa Conference held from April 11th to the 14th, 1935, in the town of Stresa on Lake Miore, Italy. The Stresa Front, as the resulting agreement became known, was not a formal treaty, but a coalition aimed at maintaining the post-World War I order. British Prime Minister Ramsay MacDonald, French Prime Minister Pierre Flandin, accompanied by Foreign Minister Pierre Lovell, and Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini issued a joint declaration condemning Germany's unilateral actions and pledging to uphold the Treaty of Versailles, the Locarno Treaties of 1925, which guaranteed borders in Western Europe, and Austria's independence. The agreement also supported a French appeal to the League of Nations against German rearmament and called for a conference in Rome to discuss Central European security. Objectively, this pact represented a momentary alignment of interest. France sought to contain German expansion to protect its eastern borders. Britain aimed to mediate and avoid continental entanglements while preserving naval superiority, and Italy, under Mussolini, wanted to safeguard Austria's independence to prevent German influence from encroaching on its borders. Why Britain and France treated Italy as a secondary nation in this pact? Objectively assessing the dynamics of the Stresa front requires examining the relative power balances and strategic priorities of these signatories. Based on the contemporaneous diplomatic records and analysis, Britain and France, as the preeminent European powers emerging from World War I, viewed Italy as a junior partner due to its economic vulnerabilities, military limitations, and divergent foreign policy ambitions. Italy's economy was strained, with a smaller industrial base compared to Britain's global empire or France's continental strength, making it less capable of contributing to a robust anti-German front. Militarily, Italy's forces were outdated and ill-prepared for major conflict, as evidenced by its larger struggles in the Ethiopia and the Spanish Civil War. Strategically, the pact's focus was predominantly on Western and Central European security, issues central to Franco-British concerns, while sidelining Italy's imperial aspiration in Africa and the Balkans. For instance, Britain entered the conference reluctant to commit to a new continental alliances, prioritizing its role as a mediator between France and Germany, and was more concerned with naval balances than Italian territorial interests. France focused on encircling Germany through alliances, saw it as a useful but not essential buffer, particularly after its recent rapprochement with Italy in January 1935. Diplomatic correspondence from the period highlights how Britain and France coordinated closely, often viewing Mussolini's Italy as opportunistic rather than core equal. Evidence from British foreign policy discussions reveals a paternalistic attitude. Italy was included to bolster the anti-German stance, but not consulted on key decisions reflecting its secondary status. This was compounded by mutual distrust. Britain and France suspected Mussolini expansionist goals, such as in Ethiopia, might undermine collective efforts. In epistemological terms, this treatment aligns with the power asymmetry theories in international relations, where stronger states dominate agenda setting and substantiated by archival records showing Britain and France driving the conference outcomes. Why this made Mussolini bitter? Mussolini's bitterness stemmed from the rapid undermining of the Stresa front by Britain's unilateral actions, which exposed Italy's marginalization and fueled perceptions of a betrayal. Just 2 months after Stresa, on June 18, 1935, Britain signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement, allowing Germany to expand its navy to 35% of Britain's tonnage and up to 45% of submarines, effectively sanctioning a breach of Versailles without consulting France or Italy. This move not only contradicted the front's anti-rearmament stance, but also prioritized British naval security over collective solidarity, leaving Mussolini feeling sidelined and humiliated. Objectively, Mussolini interpreted this as evidence that Britain and France regarded Italy as expendable, encouraging his imperial ambitions in Ethiopia as a test of their resolve. When Italy invaded Ethiopia in October 1935, Britain and France imposed League sanctions, further alienating Mussolini and dissolving the front. Diplomatic reports note that Mussolini's resentment, viewing the naval agreement as a fiasco that emboldened Germany and weakened Italy's position. This bitterness propelled Italy toward alignment with Germany, culminating in the Rome-Berlin Axis in 1936. Epistemologically, Mussolini's reaction is corroborated by primary sources such as U.S. diplomatic observations of his growing antagonism toward Britain. Comprehensive analysis using objective epistemology. An objective epistemological approach demands reliance on verifiable evidence from diplomatic archives, contemporaneous analysis, and cross-reference historical accounts, avoiding unsubstantiated narratives. The Stresa Front's formation was a pragmatic response to German defiance, but its fragility stemmed from mismatched incentives. Britain pursued appeasement to avoid war, France sought containment, and Italy leveraged it for prestige. Italy's secondary treatment was not mere prejudice, but a reflection of realpolitik. Its weaker status meant it was included for geographic utility, i.g. defending Austria, but not empowered in decision-making. Mussolini's bitterness was justified from his perspective, as the Anglo-German Naval Agreement exposed the front's hollowness, accelerating European slide towards war by isolating Italy and emboldening Hitler. This sequence, Stresa's promise, rapid betrayal, and collapse highlights his short-term bilateral deals undermine multilateral efforts, a pattern evident in subsequent events like the Munich Agreement. In sum, the episode underscores the limitation of alliances without mutual enforcement and contributing effectively to the preconditions for World War II. Now on to the next topic, the moral defense of abolishing universal suffrage. Introduction to the topic, abolishing universal suffrage. The principle that all adults can have equal right to vote regardless of qualification raises profound moral, philosophical, and practical questions. Universal suffrage is a cornerstone of modern liberal democracies, but critics have long argued that it can lead to suboptimal or even harmful outcomes when uninformed or irrational voters hold equal power. To explore a moral defense of this position using objective epistemology, we must rely on reason, empirical evidence, and logical deduction, rather than subjective opinions, emotions, or appeals to tradition. Objective epistemology, as a method, emphasizes perceiving reality through the senses, forming concepts via logic, and validating claims with facts. It rejects mysticism, relativism, or collectivism in favor of individual rational judgment. This exploration will focus on key philosophical arguments, drawing from thinkers like Plato, Aristotle, John Stuart Mill, and contemporary philosophers such as Jason Brennan. I'll examine the moral case for restricting suffrage through epistocracy, or rule by the knowledgeable, supported by evidence of voter behavior, while addressing potential counterarguments. The goal is not advocacy, but a rigorous, evidence-based analysis. Note that abolishing universal suffrage here implies replacing it with a restricted system, not eliminating voting entirely. Core premises of objective epistemology in this context. Before diving into arguments, let's ground the discussion in objective epistemology. Reality as objective. Political systems must be evaluated based on observable facts, not wishes or whims. For instance, voter ignorance isn't a moral failing, but a factual condition that can be measured through surveys and studies. Reason as a tool. Arguments must follow logical chains, i.e., if A causes B and B harms human flourishing, then A is morally questionable. Individual rights and flourishing. Morality derives from what promotes rational human life. If universal suffrage enables coercion by the incompetent, it violates the rights of those affected by poor decisions. Evidence-based. Claims will reference empirical data, such as political knowledge surveys, without relying on unverified sources. This approach avoids biases by focusing on verifiable truth. Democracy isn't inherently moral. Its value depends on outcomes. Historical, philosophical foundations for restricting suffrage. Philosophers had critiqued universal suffrage, or broad democracy, for centuries, often on moral grounds that unqualified participation undermines justice and human well-being. 1. Plato's Critique from the Republic, circa 375 BC. Argument. Democracy is morally flawed because it equates freedom with license, allowing the ignorant masses to rule. Plato uses the ship of state analogy. Just as a ship's passengers shouldn't vote on navigation if they're unqualified, leading to disaster, citizens shouldn't vote on governance without knowledge. Morally, this is indefensible because it endangers lives and society, akin to letting amateurs perform surgery. Objective epistemological basis. Empirically, Plato observed an Athenian democracy's failure, i.e., the execution of Socrates by popular vote. Logically, if expertise is required for complex tasks, government demands it too. Universal suffrage ignores objective differences in competence, violating the moral imperative to protect rational order. Implication for abolition. Replace with philosopher kings, enlightened rulers selected by merit. Morally, this defends individual rights by preventing mob tyranny. 2. Aristotle's view from Politics, circa 350 BC. Argument. Pure democracy devolves into the rule by the poor majority, who use votes to redistribute wealth from the competent minority. This is immoral as it perverts justice, giving equal power to unequals, and leads to instability. Aristotle favored a mixed system with suffrage limited to property owners or educated citizens, arguing that virtue and wisdom, not mere existence, justify political power. Objective basis. Based on observations of Greek city-states, where unrestricted democracy often led to demagoguery, logically, if humans differ in rationality, a fact, equal voting ignores this reality, enabling coercion, i.e. taxing producers to benefit non-producers. Moral defense. Restricting suffrage promotes human flourishing by ensuring decisions align with reason, not passion or envy. 3. John Stuart Mill's Weighted Suffrage from Considerations of Representative Government, 1861. Argument. Universal suffrage is problematic if it gives equal voice to the ignorant, potentially overriding better judgments. Mill proposed plural voting, extra votes for the educated or professionals. Morally, this isn't elitism, but fairness, preventing the tyranny of the majority, as he warned on liberty, from suppressing individual liberties. Objective basis. Mill drew from empirical social science of his era, noting educational disparities. Logically, if voting influences others' lives, competence is a moral prerequisite, like requiring license for driving or medicine. Implication. Not full ambition, but restriction, morally justified to safeguard liberty and progress. These historical views establish that opposition to universal suffrage isn't arbitrary, but rooted in observed human nature and logical ethics. Contemporary moral arguments, the case for epistocracy. Modern critiques build on these foundations, using data from political science to argue that universal suffrage is morally unattainable. Number 1, Jason Brennan, Instrumental and Competence Arguments from Against Democracy, 2016. Instrumental case. Democracy fails objectively because most voters are ignorant or irrational, leading to harmful policies. Evidence surveys, IG from the American National Electrical Studies, show 30 to 50% of voters lack basic knowledge. IG can't name branches of government or identify policy impacts. This results in systematic errors like supporting protectionism despite economic evidence of its harms. Morally, imposing bad decisions on society is unjust, akin to collective negligence. If outcomes matter, objectively they do for human survival, universal suffrage is immoral when it predictably worsens lives. Competence principle. Brennan argues it's wrong to exercise power over others without justification. Voting isn't a right like speech, harmless if wrong. It's coercive. Policies bind everyone. Thus, incompetent voting violates others' rights to non-harm. Objective basis. Irrationality theory by Brian Kaplan's The Myth of the Rational Voter, 2007. Since one vote doesn't decide elections, voters have no incentive to inform themselves, leading to biases, i.e. anti-market or nationalist. Logically, if competence varies, fact, equal power is irrational and immoral. Proposal. Epistocracy, suffrage restricted via knowledge tests, lotteries among qualified or weighed votes. Morally defensible as it aligns power with responsibility, reducing coercion by the uninformed. Evidence. Cross-national studies show epistocratic elements, i.e. Singapore's merit-based system, correlate with better economic and social outcomes, though causation is debated. Number 2, Brian Kaplan's economic and basis arguments. Argument. Voters systematically err due to biases, anti-foreign, anti-market, or optimism about government. This is morally problematic because it perpetuates poverty and injustice, i.e. immigration restrictions harm the global poor. Objective basis. Economic metric data shows voter preferences diverge from expert consensus, i.e. economists favor free trade, but voters don't. Logically, if experts use evidence and voters don't, universal suffrage enables anti-rational policies. Moral defense. Restricting to inform voters respects objective truth and individual autonomy, preventing democratic externalities, harms from bad votes. 3. Rights-based moral defense. Universally, suffrage assumes political equality as a natural right, but objectively, rights derive from human needs, i.e. life, liberty. If universal voting enables violations, e.g. majority imposing unjust laws, it's not a right but a privilege earned by demonstrating rationality. Example, in objective terms, a voter who supports policies based on misinformation, fact-checked falsehoods, coerces others immorally. Restriction demands the moral right to non-aggression. Potential counterarguments and rebuttals. To be comprehensive, consider objectives using the same objective lens. Number 1, equality is intrinsic moral good. Counter, all humans deserve equal rights, restricting suffrage discriminates. Rebuttal, equality applies to opportunity, not outcomes. Objectively, people differ in abilities, e.g., not everyone can be a pilot. Voting affects others, so competence is a logical qualifier. Historical restrictions, e.g. by race, were immoral because arbitrary, knowledge-based ones are evidence-driven. 2. Slippery slope to authoritarianism. Counter, who decides competence? It can lead to elite capture. Rebuttal, empirically, safeguards like transparent tests, civic exams, mitigate this. Logically, if democracy already enables demagogues, e.g. populist leaders, epistocracy can be less risky by flirting irrationality. 3. Empirical success of democracies. Counter. Democracies outperform autocracies in prosperity and rights, e.g. Freedom House data. Rebuttal. Correlation does not equal causation. Many democracies have epistocratic elements, e.g. judicial review overriding majorities. Objectively, voter ignorance persists, suggesting potential for improvement via restrictions. Number 4. Moral relativism. Counter. Morality is subjective. Universal suffrage affirms dignity. Rebuttal. Objective epistemology rejects relativism. Dignity comes from rational agency, not unchecked power. If voting harms, evidenced by policy failures, it's undignified for all. Conclusion. Weighing the moral balance. Using objective epistemology, the moral defense for abolishing universal suffrage rests on facts. Human rationality varies. Voter ignorance is widespread. and equal power leads to coercive harms. Logically, this justifies restriction to competent individuals promoting better outcomes and respecting rights. However, implementation challenges, e.g., fair tests, must be addressed empirically. This isn't a call for elitism, but for aligning politics with reality, ensuring governance serves rational human life. Further study of voter behavior data and philosophical tests could refine this, but the core logic holds. Power without knowledge is morally hazardous. Now let's go further and look at Ayn Rand's objectivism, an overview. Ayn Rand from Russia developed a comprehensive philosophical system known as objectivism, which she presented through her novels like Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, as well as nonfiction works such as Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal. Objectivism integrates metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, politics, and aesthetics into a cohesive framework grounded in reason and individualism. At its core, Rand's philosophy asserts that reality is objective, reason is the means of knowledge, self-interest is the moral foundation, and laissez-faire capitalism is the ideal political system. When Rand was asked to summarize her philosophy, standing on one foot, she stated metaphysics, objective reality, epistemology, reason, ethics, self-interest, politics, capitalism. Political epistemology, in the context of Rand's work, refers not to standalone subfield, but to how her epistemological principles, centered on reason as the absolute means of acquiring knowledge, underpin and shape her political philosophy. Rand viewed politics as derived from prior branches: metaphysics, the nature of reality; epistemology, the nature of knowledge; and ethics, the nature of morality. This hierarchical structure ensures that political systems must align with rational human nature to promote flourishing. In essence, her political epistemology explores how knowledge, or its absence, influence social organization, emphasizing that only a rational epistemology can support a free society, while irrational methods, e.g. faith or emotion, lead to coercion and tyranny. Rand's epistemology, the foundation. Rand's epistemology is explicitly objectivist, rejecting both subjectivism, knowledge as whim-based, or intrinsicism, knowledge as innate or revealed. She argued that all knowledge derives from sensory perception of an objective reality, integrating through reason via concept formation and logic. Key elements include objective reality and perception. Reality exists independent of consciousness. It is absolute and knowable through the senses. Rand dismissed skepticism, arguing that perception provides axiomatic, self-evident data, e.g. existence, identity, consciousness. She famously axiomatized existence exists. This counters subjective idealism, e.g. Kant's phenomenal distinction, and posits that humans can achieve certainty through proper methods. Reason is absolute. Reason is the faculty that identifies and integrates perceptual data into concepts. Rand's theory of concepts, detailed in Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, views them as mental integrations of units based on essential characteristics, omitting measurements. E.g., table integrates all tables by shared essentials like flat surface and support. She rejected rationalism, deduction without empirical base, Descartes, and empiricism, induction without conceptual integration, e.g. Hume, advocating a synthesis where reason is contextual and hierarchical. Volition and focus. Knowledge requires choice, to focus one's mind on reality. This volitional aspect underscores human agency. Evasion, refusal to think, leads to errors, while adherence to logic yields objective knowledge. Rand critiqued the analytic-synthetic dichotomy, arguing all truths are contextual integration of facts, not arbitrary divisions. Rejection of irrationalism. Faith, mysticism, or emotionalism are anti-reason, leading to contradictions. Rand saw these as tools for evasion, incompatible with knowledge. This epistemology is objective because knowledge is neither intrinsic, independent of mind, nor subjective, mind-dependent, but relational, the mind grasping reality through non-contradictory identification. Application to politics, deriving rational system, social system. Rand's political philosophy flows logically from epistemology. Since reason is man's means of survival, a proper society must protect the individual's right to think and act freely. Politics defines principles for social systems based on man's rational nature. Key derivations: from epistemology to ethics to politics. Ethics stems from epistemology. Man's life requires rational action, so the moral is the rational, pursued through virtues like rationality, productivity, and pride. The primary ethical principle is rational self-interest, egoism, rejecting altruism as sacrificial. Politics applies this to society. Individuals have inalienable rights to life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness, derived from their need to act on reason without interference. Reason versus force in society. A rational epistemology enables voluntary interactions via persuasion and trade. If people rely on reason, objective, evidence-based, conflicts resolve through discussion. Conversely, irrational epistemology, faith and intuition, claim supernatural knowledge, leading to irreversible disputes resolved by force. Thus, politics must banish force from human relationships, limiting government to protecting rights, police, military, and courts. Laissez-faire capitalism as ideal. Rand advocated unregulated capitalism where government enforces contracts and protects against force, fraud, but doesn't initiate force, e.g., no taxation for welfare, voluntary funding. This system rewards rational producers aligned with epistemological objectivity, success based on merit, not whims. She critiqued mixed economies, socialism and fascism as irrational, stemming from altruistic ethics and mystical epistemologies. Critique of democracy. Rand distinguished between a republic, rights protected, and unlimited democracy, majority rule. She argued that democracy, if based on irrational voters or collectivist premises, violates individual rights, e.g., majorities voting to redistribute wealth or censor speech. This ties to her epistemology. If citizens evade reason, e.g., voting on a motion, outcomes are destructive. She favored constitutional limits to safeguard rational individuals from the irrational mob. In essays like Objectivist Ethics, she linked this to broader cultural epistemology, warning that anti-reason cultures breed statism. Implication and cultural commentary. Rand's political epistemology has implication for uses like voter competence and cultural decline. She observed that epistemological corruption, e.g., pragmatism, which rejects principles, leads to political corruption, as seen in her critiques of modern intellectuals and welfare states. For instance, in analyzing historical shifts, she tied the rise of faith-based movements to authoritarian politics, emphasizing that culture, valuing reason, fosters freedom. Extension by followers, including Leonard Peikoff's work on analytic synthetic dichotomy and Tara Smith's moral philosophy building on Rand's foundations. Critics, however, argue Rand insufficiently engaged other philosophers, leading to perceived weakness in her epistemology, e.g., oversimplifying rationalism, empiricism debates. Conclusion. Ayn Rand's political epistemology underscores that rational knowledge is prerequisite for a moral society. Politics must protect reason's exercise, rejecting force and irrationality. This framework defends individualism against collectivism, positioning objectivism as a rational alternative to prevailing philosophies. For a deeper study, her Introduction to Objectivist Epistemologists and Political Essays provide primary sources revealing a system where epistemology isn't abstract but vital to human freedom and prosperity.